The last public opinion poll I saw showed Congress had an approval rating at about 9%. By contrast, Muammar Gaddafi had an approval rating at 13%, and his own people dragged him in the streets and killed him. This impeachment process demonstrates the worst in us, and it is depriving us the opportunity to raise our gaze and meet the needs of the American people. Unless you have bipartisan consensus, impeachment is a divisive issue in the country. Many people would think it's being done for political reasons. Nancy Pelosi, May 2018. And here we are in the most partisan presidential impeachment in American history. Matter of fact, when we opened the inquiry, no Republicans voted with the Democrats, and you even had Democrats voting with us in the only bipartisan vote to shut down this impeachment. And that brings us to your role, Mr. Goldman. Are you here as a partisan advocate for the Democrat position, or are you here as a nonpartisan investigator of the facts?
I'm here to present the report that we did on our investigation, which was totally and completely reliant on the actual evidence that we uncovered, the witness testimony, and the documents.
Are you a partisan?
I am not a partisan.
Mr. Castor, how long have you worked for the House?
Since 2005.
And same question, Mr. Goldman.
For the House? Since earlier this year.
Mr. Castor, do you make political donations?
I don't remember any.
Mr. Goldman, same question. Do you make political donations?
I do, sir. I think it's very important.
Matter of fact, you've given tens of thousands of dollars to Democrats, right?
Sir, I think it's very important to support candidates for office. I think our
Have you given over 100,000? I just want to know the number. I don't really care the basis. Have you given more than 100,000 bucks to Democrats?
You don't care about it?
The basis. I just want the number. So it's tens of.
I think Mr.
Burke. Do you know how much money Mr. Burke has given Democrats?
I don't know, and I don't.
Would it surprise you if it's more than 100,000?
Mr. Gaetz, I'm here to talk about this report.
So you gave tens of thousands, and Mr. Burke gave hundreds of, or more than 100,000. Do you think if you'd given more money, you might have been able to ask questions and answer them like Mr. Burke did? I guess it's something you're still pondering. Mr. Castor, have you ever tweeted anything at the president?
No.
Mr. Goldman, same question.
I have made a number of tweets in my private capacity before I came to this job when I was working in the media, yes.
Matter of fact, this is one of those tweets, right? And you said, nothing in the dossier is proven false, but in fact, the dossier said that there was a Russian consulate in Miami when there isn't. The dossier said that Michael Cohen had a meeting in Prague when he didn't. The dossier said that Michael Cohen's wife was Russian. She's in fact Ukrainian. And so as we sit here today, where you've, I guess, got a tweet mentioning a P-tape, presenting yourself not as a partisan, hired by the Democrats to pursue the president, do you regret this tweet?
Sir, I would be happy to put this investigation up with any of the nonpartisan investigations.
I just want to know if you regret the tweet, Mr. Goldman.
During my 10 years as a federal prosecutor.
Do you regret it?
I hope you read the evidence, and I think you can judge for yourself.
You either regret it or you don't regret it, Mr. Goldman. I guess you don't want to answer the question. You know what, Mr. Chairman? Earlier in this hearing, you said in your opening statement that there is nothing more urgent than impeachment right now. This is the most urgent thing we could possibly do. Well, you know what? If you're a senior right now and you can't afford your prescription drugs, that's more urgent than this. If you're a manufacturer wanting to dominate the Western Hemisphere with the passage of the USMCA, that is more urgent. If you're a farmer who wants to open markets so that your family can survive and thrive, that is a lot more urgent than this partisan process. If you're a desperate family member watching someone succumb to addiction, solving the opioid problem, probably more urgent than this partisan impeachment. If you're a member of the next generation, dealing with the challenges of extinction and climate change, a budget that's out of control, driving up the credit card of young people in this country and what they'll have to pay back as a consequence of our poor decisions, likely more urgent. But House Democrats have failed at all of these things. Matter of fact, I'd say the only thing under the Christmas tree for most Americans would be a lump of coal, but I think they're against coal too. The only thing under the Christmas tree for Americans would be impeachment and investigations. I've heard over and over Democrats say that this is all about the president's personal interest and that he abandoned the national interest. And it begs an analysis of how the nation is doing. In November, 266,000 jobs created, 80,000 over the average, 500,000 more manufacturing jobs in the Trump presidency, 700,000 construction jobs. We are doing better than ever before. The American people are thriving. Why won't you help us move along the critical issues that are far more important than your partisan impeachment?
Gentleman's time is Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Castor, I want to go to the document that started it all, the August 12th whistleblower complaint. Bullet point 1 on page 1 of the whistleblower's complaint, he says this: over the past 4 months, more than half a dozen U.S. officials have informed me of the various facts related to this effort. Mr. Castor, who are these half a dozen U.S. officials?
We don't know.
We don't know, do we? We had no chance to know for sure who these people were because we never got to talk to the whistleblower. Is that right, Mr. Castor?
That's right.
We needed to talk to the guy who started it all. We needed to talk to him to figure out who these more than half a dozen people were who formed the basis of his complaint, and we never got to. Adam Schiff's staff got to. Adam Schiff knows who he is, but we don't get to know, and therefore we don't get to know the original people, the 6 people who formed the basis of this entire thing we've been going through now for 3 months. But we did talk to 17 people, right, Mr. Castor?
That's right.
17 depositions, and you were in every single one. You were the lawyer doing the work for the Republicans in every single one. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And there's one witness who they relied on and built their report around. One witness. Who would that witness be? As I read their report, it's obviously one witness. Who's that witness, Mr.
Ambassador
Castor?
Sondland.
Ambassador Sondland. I think you said earlier his name was mentioned, I don't know, what did you say?
611 times.
611 times. More than Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, the guy who was on the call. More than Ambassador Taylor, their first witness, their star witness, the very first hearing in the Intelligence Committee. They relied on Sondland, not the whistleblower, not the more than half a dozen people who informed the whistleblower. They relied on Ambassador Sondland. Why'd they pick Sondland, Mr. Castor?
That's probably the best they got.
Because that's the best they got. The guy who had to file an addendum to his testimony, the guy that had to file the clarification, the guy who said 2 weeks ago, sitting in the same chair you're sitting in, Mr. Castor, in his 23-page opening statement, he said this: unless President Zelensky announces an investigation into Burisma and the Bidens, there would be no call with President Trump. There'd be no meeting with President Trump. There'd be no security assistance money going to Ukraine. That's what Ambassador Sondland said. Mr. Castor, was there an announcement by President Zelensky about investigating the Bidens or Burisma?
No.
No announcement.
No.
Did President Zelensky get a call from President Trump?
Yes.
Did President Zelensky get a meeting with President Trump?
Yes.
Did President Zelensky get the money from the United States?
Yes.
They got the call on July 25th. They got the money on September 11th. They got the meeting on September 25th. Is that right?
Yes.
But the guy who said none of that was going to happen is the guy they build their case around.
Yes.
Is that right, Mr. Sondland?
Yep.
Let me go to one other thing they built their case around. They built their case around a lot of hearsay, didn't they? And the best example of the hearsay, surprisingly enough, is Ambassador Sondland. It's amazing. They built their case around this ambassador, and they built their case around hearsay, and the best example of both is Mr. Sondland, Ambassador Sondland, because he filed his addendum, his clarification, where he says this. We read this a couple weeks ago. We pointed this out a couple weeks ago. He says this in bullet point number 2. In his clarification, he says, Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmak on a September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. That's his clarification. Amazing. 6 people, as I said before, having 4 conversations in one sentence. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmak on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. That's the clarification. That's their star witness who they built their case around. So-and-so tells so-and-so what somebody said to someone else, and there you have it. That's their case. They forget the 4 key facts. They forget the fact that we have the call transcript and there was no quid pro quo. They forget the fact the 2 guys on the call, President Trump and President Zelensky, have said repeatedly there was no pressure, no linkage, no pushing. They forget the fact Ukraine didn't even know aid was held at the time of the call. And they forget the fact, most important, they did nothing to get the aid released, no announcement of any type of investigation whatsoever. They forget all that, those key facts. And they build their case around the guy who had to clarify his testimony with that amazing sentence. Mr. Goldman. Did the Democrats publish phone records of the president's attorney?
Mr. Giuliani, yes.
Did the Democrats publish phone records of a member of the press?
Yes, who was also involved in this.
Did the Democrats publish phone records of a member of Congress?
Yes, who was talking to people involved.
Did the Democrats, does that member of Congress also happens to be your boss's political opponent that those phone records were published of? So the Democrats, they run this kind of investigation, ignoring the facts, not letting the whistleblower come in, and therefore not letting us know if we've talked to the more than half a dozen original sources for the whistleblower's complaint in the first place. The guy has to file an addendum with that clarification sentence. But one thing they did do in their report is they published the phone records of the president's personal lawyer, the phone records of a member of the press, and the phone records of the chairman of the Intelligence Committee's political opponent, Representative Nunes. That's what these guys did. And that's their effort to impeach the President of the United States 11 months before an election.
I mean, I think it's just the most amazing statement came out there. We're proofing that a tweet that said that he thought that the Democrats were concerned about impeachment. There's nothing the Democrats have not been concerned about for 2.5 years. Since November 2016. The president's saying nothing new in that tweet. There's now back up. He's known that they have been after impeachment. That's why Mr. Goldman is here. That's why Mr. Burke is here. That's why we're going through this charade of staff having to answer staff questions. And basically, when we don't like how it's going, we start asking staff on staff and getting into a staff argument. Where's Adam? Where's Adam? It's his report, his name. Mr. Goldman, you're a great attorney, but you're not Adam Schiff, and you don't wear a pen.
That's true.
We got a problem here. And the problem is developing this. You said you were an attorney. You're a very good prosecutor. I believe it. I've read your bio. You're a good attorney. You understand what quid pro quo is, correct?
I do.
You understand what asking for something in exchange for something actually means, correct?
I do.
You know about the conversation of Mr. Biden when he asked and he said, I'm not going to give you the $1 billion. You know about that conversation, correct? You want me to read it to you, or do you know it?
One second. Are you talking about in 2015?
No, I'm talking about the one from the national, where you did I'll read it to you since you're having trouble. As I remember going over to the Ukraine, convincing our team, our leaders, convincing them that we should provide for loan guarantees. I went over, I guess, the 12th or 13th time to Kiev. I was supposed to announce that there was a $1 billion loan guarantee. And I got a commitment from Poroshenko, and they said that they would take action against the state prosecutor. They didn't. So they said they were walking out to the press conference. I said, nah, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have authority. You have no authority. You're not the president. The president said, I said, call him. Laughter. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm getting ready to be leaving here, and I think about 6 hours. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving here in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired. Did he ask for something, request something, and hold something of value?
He did. George Kent testified that was...
I think I'll do what you did. George Kent testified this. I'm asking about not George Kent. I'm asking about this question.
Right, but it's important context.
It's not. Answer this question. Did he or did he not? Either Joe Biden's a liar, telling a story to make people impressed, or he actually did this. Which is it?
He did it pursuant to U.S. official policy.
So he did it in withholding actual dollars, actual thing, holding this out there. So Joe Biden, of everybody that we discussed about, is the only one that's done a quid pro quo. He's the only one that's used taxpayer dollars to actually threaten a foreign government. And yet we're sitting here pretending that this is not happening. We're sitting here pretending that a president of the United States now would not be concerned. Look, you look at it this way. Joe Biden's a terrible candidate. He can destroy himself on the campaign trail, but he can't get by this. And it doesn't matter who brings it up. It doesn't matter who does it, because this is what happened. And you can whitewash it all you want. You can go over whatever you want, but that's what he did. He's either a liar or he did it, and he did it. Approximately how many times do you rely on Gordon Sondland's testimony in your report?
Oh, it's nearly a 300-page report.
Would you be amazed if it was 600 times or better? You wouldn't have any idea or not?
I have no idea.
Okay? You did. It's over 600 times. Would you also understand, if you do a simple check of your report, that over 158 times Mr. Sondland said, instead of not knowing something, to the best of my knowledge, or I don't know? Would that surprise you?
Are you talking about the report or his deposition?
The deposition and the closed-door testimony.
Yes, and over time he remembered a lot more as he was refreshed by other people's testimony.
It is. The question we're having here, though, is Mr. Sondland also said, and many times he said he presumed what actually happened. According to your report, HYPSI, and we'll classify that and we'll determine that to be the Intelligence Committee and the other investigation with the other two committees. We okay with that?
Certainly.
Okay. Issued dozens of subpoenas, is that right?
I'm not, certainly over a dozen, yes.
Some of the subpoenas were not publicly reported until the HYPSI issued its majority report, correct?
Most of the subpoenas were
Answer the question. Is Mr. Burke had so much free reign? Let's go at it. Either answer the question or elaborate, one or the other.
Sir, I'm trying to answer the question.
Did you or didn't you? Did it come out or not?
Did what come out?
I'll read it again. Some of the subpoenas were not publicly reported until the HYPSI issued its majority report, correct?
Yes, they were given to the minority, but not the public, yes.
Putting aside the witnesses who have publicly been identified, did you issue any other subpoenas for testimony other than the ones publicly identified?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Thank you.
But I'm not sure.
How many subpoenas were issued for records?
Well, we issued a number of subpoenas for records. We did issue 6 subpoenas to executive branch agencies, and they all defied our subpoenas.
In this, moving on to other issues here, the Wall Street Journal reported that the committee issued at least 4 subpoenas to Verizon and AT&T for call records. Is that correct? Are we wondering?
Yes, we are, because there are multiple numbers. We only issued subpoenas for call records for people who were involved in the investigation and who had already been subpoenaed by the committee for documents and testimony of their own.
Absolutely wonderful stuff, but answer my question. 4?
Well, I am trying to answer your question.
Was it at least 4?
Yes.
Thank you. Could have saved us a lot of time there. How many subpoenas were issued to AT&T?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Can you check your records? This is important, because we just found out about this over the weekend. We got a massive document dump over the weekend preparing for this hearing, in which the chairman admitted and the staff admitted they're not going to be able to read it all anyway. So for all of you writing reports about this, all that massive document dump, we're just simply going on a Schiff report, which Schiff refuses to come testify about, but sends his staff. So this is important stuff. We just found out about this. So how many subpoenas were issued to AT&T?
I don't know. If you'd like me to find out during the break, I'd be happy to.
Then, again, maybe your chairman could be here to actually answer this. Was it targeted at a single telephone number or numbers?
We subpoenaed for call records, multiple numbers.
How many?
I don't know. None of, this is very important though. None of members of Congress, none of staff of Congress.
Oh, we're getting to that.
None of journalists.
We're getting to that.
We only did it to the subjects who were involved in the investigation, which is a very routine and standard investigative practice.
And you're not going to hear anything from me about a subpoena and the legality of a subpoena. My problem is this: who on the committee asked that those numbers that you actually did put into for a subpoena and get those numbers back? Who was it that asked that they be cross-checked for members of the media and members of the Congress? Who ordered that?
I don't think that's how we did it, sir.
No, whoa. You came out with a report that actually showed these people, such as Mr. Chairman Nunez and others, were actually on these calls.
Yes.
Now someone, and you and I, we're not going to play cute here. Somebody took the 4 records that you asked for, at least 4, took those numbers and then said, hey, let's play match game. Who ordered the match game for members of Congress and the press? Was it you?
I don't think anyone did, sir.
Then how did you get, okay, come on, that's the most ridiculous item I've ever heard. You don't just all of a sudden pick up numbers in which you have to match those numbers to actually show where they are, and you don't come up with them. Who ordered them to actually match for members of Congress and the press?
That's actually what you just described is exactly how it happens.
You pick an event. Who ordered to find out if Nunez's number was on those calls?
If I could just explain, sir. You pick an event of significance in the investigation, and you look for sequencing and patterns surrounding that event. You look then at the numbers, and you try to identify what those numbers are, and then you start to build the circumstantial case.
At this point, that's a wonderful explanation, but not an answer to my question. Those are you looking for the 4 numbers you asked for and to see how they're connected. I understand the subpoena that you issued. My question directly, was it you or was it Chairman Schiff that said, while we're doing this, let's see if this matches Chairman Nunez's number. Let's see if this matches a member of the press's number. Somebody along the way just didn't all of a sudden have an epiphany, unless you're getting ready to throw a low-level staffer under the bus, that these numbers might match. So who did it? Was it Chairman Schiff or was it you? Be careful, you're under oath.
I know I'm under oath, sir.
Then answer the question.
Matter. And I will answer the question if you give me a second here. It's not a simple answer.
The same second that was not afforded to my witness, by the way.
Well, I think he was allowed to answer the question.
Who decided to leak it, by the way? If you're not going to tell me the other story, while you're thinking about how you're going to answer that question, who decided to leak it? The information. Why did you include it in the report?
That's not a leak, sir.
Why did you include it in the report? After not saying anything else about this, not publicly known. So 2 questions are hanging out that everybody's looking for an answer for, including me. Who ordered it? Was it you or was it Chairman Schiff? And then why was it decided, except for nothing but smear purposes, to be included in the Schiff report?
Well, I'm not going to get into the deliberations of our investigation with you, and I will tell you the reason it was included in the report is because the calls were surrounding important evidence to our investigation. And I think that your question is frankly not better directed not at me, but at the people who were having conversations.
Oh, no, we're not going to play that game. No, we're not going to play that game. You're as good as Mr. Burke. You're not going to play that game. You're not answering the question. And every member of the media, everybody here, when you start going into the decorum of this House, when you start looking at members' telephone numbers, you start looking at reporters' telephone numbers, which they ought to be scared about, you took a subpoena for 4. And then you decided to play match game. You found numbers that you thought were like, some of them actually didn't exist because they claimed that they were for the White House Budget Office, and they were not. So we're throwing stories out there because nobody was out there acting. So I go back to my question. Are you going to go on record in front of everybody here today and say that you will not tell who ordered this, you or Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman, you or Mr. Schiff?
I am going to go on record and tell you that I'm not going to reveal how we conducted this investigation.
And that's the problem we have with this entire thing. Mr. Schiff said behind closed doors.
I can tell you what the importance is.
I'm done with you for right now. We're done. You're not answering the question. You're not being honest about this answer because you know who it is. You're just not answering. Mr. Castor.
I have some information on the subpoenas.
Let's go.
We did receive copies of the subpoenas, and we tracked this. There were 6, as I understand it. And let me just say at the outset, our members have concerns about this exercise for 3 reasons. The subpoenas yielded information about members of Congress. Whether they're subpoenaed the members' phone records or not, it's a concern when the information yields member of Congress's phone records, and then the information is publicized. Second is with journalists. It's just generally a very tricky area to start investigating journalists' call records. And the third is with regard to Mr. Giuliani, who was serving as the president's personal attorney. But there's 6 subpoenas, as we understand it. The first went to AT&T for the Giuliani numbers. The second was in regard to Igor Fruman, to a company, CSC Holdings. The third related to Mr. Sondland. That was off to Verizon. The fourth was back to AT&T, seeking information on a certain number. The fifth was back to AT&T. And the sixth was seeking subscriber information, which impacted the veteran journalist John Solomon. And also involved with these are some of the attorneys involved, such
Mr.
as
Castor, can I ask you a question?
Ms. Tunsing and Geneva.
Mr. Castor, you've been a veteran of the Hill investigators for 15 years, and this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this. You never have either. Would it be interesting to note, because Mr. Goldman chooses not to answer because he doesn't want to incriminate, I believe, either himself or the chairman or somebody else. Would it be interesting to you to find, as you've dealt with committee staff for a long time, somebody to just have an epiphany just to do those match records on their own, or were they under direction by somebody to do that?
Well, it's obviously they were trying to figure something out.
That's it. Mr. Goldman, we're used to committees and people and witnesses taking gratuitous shots at people they don't like. And earlier today, in your testimony, you made a comment that really goes to an interesting thing, and I'll even go back to the chairman questioning motive. When your testimony, you said, as you were discussing Mr. Sondland, you made a very snide comment, your facial expression showed that he was $1 million donor to the president. The implication being he either got his job because he bought it, or his implication was he was loyal to the president and say anything about it. Be very careful about how you throw around dollars in giving, because you and Mr. Burke are real heavy donors to the Democratic Party. And I'm not going to say it questions your motive or your position here today, but we need to make sure that this thing is already blown out of proportion. We're already not answering questions, and you are here without a pen because your chairman will not testify. That says all we need to hear. He don't even stand behind his own report, and he sends you. I hope it works out for you. I'm done. At this point, I turn it over to Ashley.
Could I respond? Are you trying to say that I? What are you trying to say? What is the implication here? But by the way, I didn't give anything close to $1 million remotely, so I don't know.
The implication is we want Schiff in that chair, not you. The implication is the person that wrote the report is the person that should come and present it, and you weren't elected by anybody, and you're here giving this testimony in place of the chairman. I hope that clears up the implication.
The gentleman does not have the time, and the gentleman has been warned before. He cannot simply yell out and disrupt the committee. The gentleman, Mr. Collins, has the time.
I think you understand exactly what you did. And I called it out for just the way you did. You thought you were going to get by with it, and you didn't. That's all I'm saying. Ms. Cowan.
Well, I would like to just say one other thing.
I am done.
Point of order. There's no question before the gentleman.
I mean, you're casting aspersions.
No, as you did, Mr. Goldman.
Point of order.
As you did, Mr. Sondland. Now, according to the chairman's own ruling just a few minutes ago, I'm done asking questions, and I'm not asking you to elaborate because I'm not asking you any more questions. I've asked all. You won't answer the question on who told the committee to actually check these numbers. You won't say if it's you or if it's Mr. Schiff. You won't answer my questions, so we're done. We're going to Ms. Cowan. You have, as was Mr. Burke said, you'll have plenty of time with helpful majority counsel to answer the
question. Does the gentleman yield his time to Ms. Cowan?
This is the second hearing on impeachment that this committee has held in the last week. Well, I would submit that you're investigating the wrong guy. Let's look at the facts. Mr. Castor, Ukraine, that's been at the center of attention in this impeachment hearing, has historically been one of the world's most corrupt nations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And under legislation that Congress passed, the National Defense Authorization Act, it was President Trump's responsibility, his duty, to see that U.S. tax dollars did not go to Ukraine unless they were making progress in reducing corruption. Is that also right?
Yes, that's right.
And isn't it true that Joe Biden's son, Hunter, had placed himself right smack dab in the middle of that corruption?
Yes, he did. Burisma was one of the most corrupt companies in Ukraine.
And contrary to what House Democrats and many in the media would have you believe, the concerns about Hunter Biden's involvement in Ukrainian corruption, they're not some sort of vast right-wing conspiracy concocted by supporters of the president, are they? In fact, the concerns about Hunter Biden were first raised by the Obama administration. Is that right?
That's right. And also Washington Post, a lot of publications, and the State Department.
And the Obama administration's concerns about Obama didn't end there, did they? The former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, said she was coached by the Obama administration on how to answer pesky questions related to Hunter Biden and Burisma that might arise during her Senate confirmation process. Is that right?
The State Department was so concerned about this, they gave her a mock Q&A on this question.
And nearly every single witness who testified at the Intelligence Committee impeachment inquiry agreed that Hunter Biden's Burisma deal created, at the very least, the appearance of conflict of interest. Is that correct?
That's correct. And, you know, Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent testified that there was an investigation into Burisma, into their head, Zochevsky, and they were trying to track down $23 million that he had taken out of the country. They were working with the United Kingdom. They were working, the United States, the United Kingdom. Ukraine was working on tracking this money down. And there was an investigation, an active investigation going on, and a bribe was paid. And that bribe was paid. It allowed Zlochevsky to get off scot-free. Right around that time is when Burisma went about sprucing up their board, shall we say.
And yet, with all that evidence, the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee under Chairman Schiff, and now the Democrats here, are determined to sweep the Biden corruption under the rug, ignore it, not let us call witnesses on it, and instead rush to impeach the president, all to satisfy, I would argue, their radical left-wing base. What a disservice to the country. Imagine this. You've got the Vice President, Joe Biden, in charge of overseeing our Ukrainian policy, and his son, Hunter Biden, receiving $50 grand a month with no identifiable expertise in either energy or Ukraine, yet the Democrats won't let us present witnesses on that. So let's do the next best thing since we can't bring the witnesses here. Let's watch a couple of videos.
You didn't have any extensive knowledge about natural gas or Ukraine itself, though?
No.
The list that you gave me of the reasons why you're on that board, you did not list the fact that you were the son of the vice president.
Of course, yeah, no.
What role do you think that played?
I think that it is impossible for me to be on any of the boards that I just mentioned without saying that I'm the son of the Vice President of the United States.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not.
You know, Joe Biden got a little testy with a voter at one of his events in Iowa last week, calling the man a liar, challenging him to a push-up contest, among other things, and falsely stating once again that nobody said there was anything wrong with his son's deal in Ukraine. Well, you know what? That's a lot of malarkey. A lot of people have been saying that for quite a while now, and they're right. And what's worse is that first the Intelligence Committee and now this committee are conducting an impeachment investigation against President Trump based on, as Professor Turley put it last week, wafer-thin evidence and ignoring evidence of a high-level U.S. official who actually did engage in a quid pro quo with the Ukrainian government, in fact, confessed to it in this video.
I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
You're investigating the wrong guy, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I had some questions for the witness, Mr. Burke, but he has absconded. So I'm going to use my 5 minutes, but not to ask questions. It is interesting, though, to have heard Mr. Goldman refuse to answer a question about the investigation, yet he comes in here, and the very reason that he wants to see the president for the first time any president's ever been removed from office, why, he's been obstructing. He didn't answer our questions. So perhaps if we're going to apply his sense of justice to him, it would be time to have him removed from his position. But that's only if we apply his own standards. And as Chris Plant said, if it weren't for double standards, some of these folks wouldn't have standards at all. But we were told also at the beginning that we would hear lawyers present evidence. Lawyers are going to come in here. Now, what normally happens, and I've been in some kangaroo hearings in courts, not my own when I was there, but I have been mistreated in hearings before, but I have never seen anything like this where we don't allow the fact witnesses to come in here. We have the lawyers come in and tell us what we're supposed to know about those witnesses and about their testimony and about their impression and what the law is. This is outrageous. My friend Jim Sensenbrenner said in 41 years, he's never seen anything like what we have going on here to try to oust a sitting president. And it's also outrageous to hear people say, well, this man thought he was a king because he said he could do anything he wanted, when they know that that statement was in the context of whether or not he could fire Mueller. And of course he could fire Mueller. He could fire or not fire Mueller. He could appoint a special prosecutor to invest Mueller and Weissman. I think he should have. But that's his prerogative, and he could have done anything about that he wanted. To take that out of context, say he thinks he's a king. Let me tell you what a king is. A king is someone who says over 20 times, I can't do that. Congress has to change the law on immigration. And then he decides, you know what? I got a pen, I got a phone, I'll do whatever I want. And by golly, he does. He makes new law with a pen and a phone. Now that is more like a monarchy, not somebody saying they can fire a special prosecutor if they want to. And regarding treason, the Constitution itself says you got to have 2 witnesses. And that's not hearsay witnesses, none of this stuff that wouldn't be admissible in any decent court. No, that's 2 direct evidence witnesses that can come in and positively identify themselves, not something they overheard or something, but actually be witnesses to treason. And yet this group comes in here, they toss treason out in a report like it's no big deal. We can bring in a bunch of hearsay witnesses, and then we'll have the lawyers testify and then throw a president out of office. This is so absurd. It's so absurd. Now, we have a witness come in, and we're told he's going to be a witness. That's why he doesn't have to follow under the rules of decorum. And then, I've never seen this, he gets to come up and grill his opposing adversary witness. I feel like, to be fair, if we were going to make this thing fair, Mr. Castor would be able to come up and grill Mr. Burke. But this isn't about being fair. It's not about due process. This is about a kangaroo system. And let me tell you, those that think you've done something special here, you have set the bar so low, I'm afraid it's irreparable. I mean, just think, we've had people already mention, the next president, Joe Biden. We're told, gee, he may be the next president. Well, we've already got the forms. All we have to do is eliminate Donald Trump's name and put Joe Biden's name in there, because he's on video, he and his son. He basically has admitted to the crime that's being hoisted on the president improperly. So I'm scared for my country. Because I've never seen anything like this. This is supposed to be the Congress. I came up here from a court where we had order and we had rules, and I've seen nothing of the kind in here today. And it's outrageous that we're trying to remove a president with a kangaroo court like this.
Trump states, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. Later, he says, I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. The majority report on page 13 says, the U.S. intelligence community had unanimously determined that Russia, not Ukraine, interfered in the 2016 election to help the candidacy of President Trump. Mr. Castor, there appears to be a conflict there. President Trump is asking the Ukraine to investigate something. The majority has decided that it's an illegitimate request because there was no interference in an election by the Ukraine. Is that how you read this?
Yes.
And the press release from the majority on their report says, as part of this scheme, President Trump, acting in his official capacity and using his position of public trust, personally and directly requested that the president of Ukraine, that the government of Ukraine publicly announce investigations into, subsection 2, a baseless theory promoted by Russia alleging that Ukraine, rather than Russia, interfered in the 2016 U.S. election. Is that true?
Yes.
Mr. Castor, I want to ask you something. Have you seen this article from Politico dated January 11, 2017?
Yes, I have.
And the title of that article is Ukrainian Efforts to Sabotage Trump Backfire. Is that correct?
Yes.
I want to read you the second paragraph. Ukrainian government officials tried to help Hillary Clinton and undermine Trump by publicly questioning his fitness for office. They also disseminated documents implicating a top Trump aide in corruption and suggested they were investigating the matter only to back away after the election. And they helped Clinton's allies research damaging information on Trump and his advisors, a Politico investigation found. Isn't it true that President Trump had a legitimate reason to request help from the Ukraine about the 2016 election? And I'm not suggesting for a minute that Russia didn't interfere. Of course they interfered. But the Ukraine officials tried to influence the election.
Yes.
Let's move on to Ambassador Sondland. I only have 10 fingers and 10 toes, so I can't count above 20, Mr. Castor. But you know how many times Ambassador Sondland said that he did not know, did not recall, had no recollection, had limited memory, or failed to remember something in his October 17th testimony? You know how many times? 325. Does that surprise you? 325.
Big number.
And then he files a clarifying statement, and he clarifies a few things, I guess. But did you have any contact with Ambassador Sondland between the time of his deposition and the time of his clarifying statement?
No.
Did the majority?
I have no idea.
You have no idea. So they may have had influence on his testimony.
I did.
And that would be evidence of bias. That would be evidence of credibility. That would be evidence that we should take into account before. But we'll never know, will we? Because the majority counsel has a right to assert a privilege as to information that's relevant to this committee's decision. The majority counsel has a right to assert a privilege in any communications he has with the chairman, Adam Schiff, doesn't he? As does minority counsel. That's a privilege that we've reserved here in Congress, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the same thing is true of FOIA. The Freedom of Information Act does not apply to memos that majority counsel writes. Isn't that true?
Correct.
So we've demanded that of the executive branch, but we have allowed ourselves not to be part of FOIA, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the majority has a privilege. The president also has a privilege. It's called executive privilege. He can meet with the Secretary of State, and that's a privileged conversation. He can meet with the Secretary of Defense. That's a privileged conversation. He can meet with the Secretary of Energy. That's a privileged conversation. Now, when the majority has subpoenaed those witnesses, and the president has refused to produce those witnesses or relevant documents, or what they consider relevant documents, they are charging him with an article of impeachment for obstruction. In fact, their report says the president obstructed the impeachment inquiry by instructing witnesses to ignore subpoenas. Why?
It's been a truly extraordinary and historically unprecedented hearing. It has frankly been an outrageous violation of due process, a series of violations of due process. In fact, let me review the past 7.5 hours. In the beginning of our proceedings today, I asked Chairman Nadler if Mr. Burke was appearing here as a staff member or as a witness, but the chairman gave strangely conflicting answers to that important question. When I objected under House Rule 17 that Mr. Burke was repeatedly and brazenly steamrolling over House decorum rules and using language that impugned the motives of the President of the United States and suggested he is disloyal to his country, Chairman Nadler insisted that those words could not be taken down and stricken from the record, saying, quote, "The rules don't apply here because Mr. Burke is merely appearing as a staffer." But later, Chairman Nadler stated the opposite and declared that Mr. Burke was appearing to present the Democrat member's report as their representative, which would of course mean that the member rules should apply. Then Mr. Burke was allowed to switch places and turn from witness to questioner. That's extraordinarily bizarre, of course, but it's entirely consistent with this whole impeachment circus. As everybody knows, Intel Chairman Adam Schiff was allowed in the opening act of this circus to serve as the judge, jury, prosecutor, witness coach, and case strategy chief all in one. So much for due process. Under the Democrats' haphazardly drawn special parameters for these special hearings, House Resolution 660, Mr. Burke was then allowed to join the elected members of Congress on this dais and ask 45 minutes of questions of his fellow witness, Mr. Castor. When he was argumentative, assumed critical facts not in evidence, engaged in speculation, and committed countless other violations of regular House rules and the federal rules of civil procedure, I objected, but was then ruled out of order by Chairman Nadler, who informed all of us that while House Resolution 660 specifically provides for objections, it lists none of them, and the Democrats have ignored every request of ours to obtain a list of what rules and objections would be enforced and applicable today. Again, so much for due process and fairness. A month ago, the Republican members of this committee formally requested all documents related to the impeachment investigation, but Chairman Nadler and Schiff withheld everything until, you know when? Saturday afternoon. That's right, less than 48 hours before this hearing, they dumped approximately 8,000 pages of documentation on us while we were back home in our districts. They intentionally made it literally impossible for us to review all material in any meaningful way, mere hours before this fateful hearing. What's worse is that the documents they decided to dump on us are not all of the underlying records we need to review, but rather only a partial, redacted, and biased subset of information that they think will advance their false narrative. And as has been mentioned here, we're being allowed no minority day hearing, which is required by regular House rules. Now, I'd love to cross-examine Mr. Burke himself, but Chairman Nadler's special and still mysterious rules for this hearing won't allow it. I notice he's disappeared from the hearing room. I would love to ask him under oath about his own biases. Because, you know, he hammered here over and over today the importance of fairness and objectivity and accuracy, and he insisted that everything here has to be unbiased. But if he was under oath here, he would be forced to admit that FEC records show that he has personally donated approximately $99,000 to Democrat candidates over the years, including sizable donations to Hillary Clinton for president, and also donated to past Trump opponents, including Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand. Mr. Burke appeared here as a fact witness and a finder of fact, but in our system, a finder of fact is supposed to be fair and impartial. He's supposed to be an umpire. The problem with all this, and the problem that everybody at home can see with their own eyes, is that the umpires in this high-stakes game are parading around the field in the majority team's jerseys. The report of evidence released by Republican committee staff on December 2nd carefully documents that in the hearings that led us to this point today, Chairman Schiff directed witnesses called by the Democrats not to answer Republican questions. He rejected witnesses identified Republicans who would have injected some semblance of fairness and objectivity, and he denied Republican subpoenas for testimony and documents, violating the Democrats' own rules to vote down those subpoenas with no notice to Republicans. Chairman Schiff also publicly fabricated evidence about President Trump's July 25th phone call, and he misled the American public about his interactions with the anonymous whistleblower to selectively seek information to paint misleading public narratives. The anonymous whistleblower reportedly acknowledged having a professional relationship with Vice President Biden, and obviously his motives, biases, and credibility are essential to this case, but we can't question it. This is not due process. This is not the rule of law, and this is not how to impeach an American president, and this is not how we're supposed to run a country. It can't be. 17 out of 24 of our colleagues over there already voted to proceed with impeachments before we started all this. They've already made up their minds. They were prejudiced before we walked in, but the American people are not. Fairness still matters, truth matters, and the people can see clearly that this is a sham.
Last week, I expressed concern regarding the deeply flawed and partisan process the Democrat majority has been undertaking during this impeachment inquiry. Mr. Chairman, I'm particularly reminded of your quote, "There must never be a narrowly voted impeachment or an impeachment substantially supported by one of our major political parties and largely opposed by the other. Such an impeachment would lack legitimacy, would produce divisiveness and bitterness in our politics for years to come, and will call into question the very legitimacy of our political institutions." You made that statement back in 1998. Now, I'm glad we're moving on to presenting the quote-unquote evidence gathered in this report. Not to hear from direct fact witnesses, but a 300-page report that's built largely on hearsay, opinion, and speculation. And I'm especially outraged that the purported author of it, Chairman Schiff, is not here to answer our questions today. Now that we have the report and can discuss the facts within, or the lack thereof, there are 4 facts that will never change. Both President Trump and President Zelensky say there was no pressure. Second, the call transcript shows no conditionality between aid and an investigation. 3, Ukrainians were not aware that aid was withheld when the president spoke. And 4th, Ukraine didn't open an investigation but still received the aid and a meeting with President Trump. I want to move on to the idea of hearsay and the fact that this report contains so much of it and relies on so much of it. Mr. Castor, did the Democrats' impeachment report rely on hearsay to support their assertions?
Yes, it did.
How many times were you able to find assertions based on hearsay?
We went through and counted over 50 instances of key facts.
Can you give us some of the examples of the hearsay being relied on by the majority to make their case?
You know, a lot of the information, for example, that Ambassador Taylor was communicating, you know, he very diligently recorded notes about what some of the various officials told him, but it was about, you know, it was 1 and 2 steps removed from the actual fact. And that's the problem with hearsay, is that it's a whisper down the lane situation. And if some of the people that are doing the whispering have are predisposed to not like President Trump, then what they're whispering down the lane becomes even more distorted.
Did you also find instances where the Democrats' report used witnesses' speculations and presumptions?
And the biggest one, of course, and this has sort of become the big daddy of the hearing, is Sondland presuming that the aid was tied to the investigations, because as he engaged in a back and forth with Mr. Turner, nobody on the planet told him that was the case.
Mr. Castor, I want to move on to foreign policy and the idea that somehow the president was abusing foreign policy. Repeatedly, witnesses came before the Intelligence Committee and talked about how the president was operating outside the bounds of the process for using norms. The president sets foreign policy, correct?
Absolutely.
And from where does he derive that power?
The Constitution.
Article 2, Section 2, in fact.
People, yeah.
Can you give us examples of these members of the foreign policy establishment who took issue with the president's foreign policy direction and choices?
Well, for example, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testified that when he was listening to the call, he had prepared talking points and the call package, and he was visibly just completely deflated when he realized that his call notes weren't being referenced by the president. And a lot of the interagency officials, I think, became very sad that the president didn't revere their policymaking apparatus.
Is it safe to say there's another reason the president's skeptical of relying on some of these individuals to carry out his foreign policy goals, like rooting out corruption in Ukraine?
I think the president is skeptical of the interagency bureaucracy.
Is that maybe why he instead relied on Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Sondland, and others?
Correct. And by the way, all 3 of those officials are not that far outside of the chain of the U.S. government.
Would it be appropriate in any investigation of corruption in Ukraine to exempt or remove, say, a political supporter?
Certainly would be.
Would it be inappropriate to remove a political opponent?
That's correct, yeah.
Would it be inappropriate to remove the son of a political opponent from any investigation involving Ukrainian corruption?
Absolutely. I mean, this all goes to the heart of bias.
Thank you for those answers. Mr. Chairman, I go back to what you said this morning about the facts being undisputed. I would argue that the facts, in fact, are disputed. And what you contend are facts are, in fact, not. They are witness presumptions, hearsay, and speculation. And the facts here are, in fact, that this is the shortest impeachment in U.S. history, based on the thinnest of evidentiary records and on the narrowest grounds. Mr. Chairman, this impeachment process is a farce and a stain on the committee and on the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've never seen a more partisan spectacle than what I've witnessed here today. Democrats want the rules to apply when it benefits them and not to apply when Republicans invoke them. 9 hours ago now, Mr. Burke, a hired gun for the Democrats, got 30 minutes to spread his partisan rhetoric and then 45 minutes to cross-examine witnesses. That's 70 minutes more than most of the members of this committee who have been elected by their districts to serve in the United States Congress. And Mr. Burke is an unelected New York lawyer specifically brought in by the Democrats to give his opinion. A politically biased consultant who has given hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal elections to the likes of ActBlue, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and Biden. Mr. Burke gave over $5,000 alone to Hillary Clinton for her presidential race. No wonder why he has an axe to grind. Mr. Burke is a white-collar criminal defense lawyer who brags on his website of getting New York financial brokers deferred prosecution for tax fraud and fund managers off for insider trading charges. And Mr. Burke was able to say whatever he wanted to say without swearing an oath to his testimony that it would be truthful. So he can sit before this committee, not as a fact witness, and directly lie to the American people without any threat of criminal prosecution. Makes sense. He's a white-collar criminal defense lawyer. I'm sure he didn't want to incriminate himself. This is the same Mr. Burke who authored a series of reports as early as October 2017, 2 years ago, on his opinion as to whether President Trump obstructed justice and colluded with Russia. He also represented Mayor Bill de Blasio in a federal investigation of de Blasio's fundraising activities. For my fellow Americans and Floridians watching this charade, this is who was sitting at the top of the dais next to the chairman acting like a member of this committee, a partisan New York lawyer with a written bias against President Trump who gave thousands to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. And all of this spectacle, all of it, not a single fact witness has appeared in front of this committee. We have been denied a minority hearing day, which I asked for the last hearing. All we have had testify are partisan lawyers giving their opinions. So let's talk about the facts that we do have before us. We heard from Mueller. No evidence that the Trump campaign colluded or conspired with Russia to influence the 2016 election. No obstruction of justice. After denying the president to call witnesses in closed-door secret proceedings and denying Republicans from calling all their witnesses in closed-door proceedings, denying the president's counsel to cross-examine witnesses in intel hearings, the facts are this. Sondland stated when questioned, did the president tell you about any preconditions for anything? His answer, no. For the aid to be refused? No. For a White House meeting? No. Ambassador Sondland also testified that President Trump wanted nothing from Ukraine. Tim Morrison, when questioned, and there was no quid pro quo, answered, correct. The aid was released. 4 facts never change. Both President Trump and President Zelensky say there was no pressure. The call transcript shows no conditionality between aid and an investigation, no quid pro quo. Ukrainians were not aware that aid was withheld when the president spoke. Ukraine didn't open an investigation, but still received aid in a meeting with President Trump. Mr. Castor, has any committee heard from the whistleblower, either in closed-door hearings or in open hearings?
No.
Did Chairman Schiff state that he would call the whistleblower to testify?
He did.
Has that happened?
It has not.
Is it going to occur?
I hope so.
Have other countries' aid also been held up?
Yes.
Mr. Goldman, on October 2nd, the New York Times reported that the whistleblower, quote, approached a House Intelligence Committee aide with his concerns about Mr. Trump. Is that accurate?
Sorry, say that again?
On October 2nd, the New York Times reported that the whistleblower approached a House Intelligence Committee aide with his concern about Mr. Trump. Is that accurate?
I think the whistleblower's concerns about President Trump are from the threats that
no, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, did the whistleblower approach a House Intelligence Committee? Let me ask it a different way. Have you had any communications with the whistleblower?
As I said earlier in response to questions from your colleagues, I'm not going to get into any...
So you're refusing to answer whether you've communicated with the whistleblower?
The whistleblower is not relevant to this report.
He's the whole basis of the beginning of this investigation. He's absolutely relevant to this committee and to the American people.
The whistleblower's complaints, for the reasons that Mr. Castor said, are not included. His allegations are not included in our report because the evidence has been outstripped and surpassed by the 17 witnesses that we have had come in to testify directly about the conduct that the whistleblower blew the whistle
So as you sit
about.
here today, do you know the identity of the whistleblower?
Sir, I'm not going to talk to you about the identity of the whistleblower.
Because you're also refusing to answer whether you've had communications. That's my time, not yours. You're refusing to answer whether you had communications with the whistleblower. Has any other staff in the Intel Committee had communications with the whistleblower?
Sir, in the Intelligence
Committee... You're refusing to answer that question. And unfortunately, the American people want to know those answers, and unfortunately, my time
Congress has...
The 299-page Democratic majority report mentions the Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson on pages 26, 33, 138, 140, and 143. Mr. Goldman, you were present for the October 4, 2019 transcribed interview of the Inspector General Michael Atkinson, correct?
Yes.
On pages 53 to 73 of that transcribed interview, the Inspector General's testimony confirms the following: that the whistleblower made statements to the Inspector General under penalty of perjury that were not true and correct. That the whistleblower first made statements in writing under penalty of perjury that were not true and correct. The whistleblower then made statements under penalty of perjury that were not true and correct in his or her verbal responses to the Inspector General's investigative team. Because of the whistleblower's statements in writing and verbally to the Inspector General that were neither true, correct, or accurate, pages 53 to 73 of that sworn testimony reveal that the Inspector General was not able to answer any questions, none from me, about the whistleblower's contact or communication with Chairman Schiff's staff, of which Mr. Goldman is a member. Mr. Castor, do you remember anywhere in this 299-page report that makes reference to the fact that when the whistleblower started this inquiry, he or she did so by making statements under penalty of perjury that were neither true or correct in writing, and then did so again verbally?
I don't remember that.
After the Inspector General testified on October 4th, and after media reports revealed that the whistleblower and Chairman Schiff did not disclose their prior contacts or communications with one another, the whistleblower contacted the Inspector General to explain why he or she made statements under penalty of perjury in writing and verbally that were not true, correct, and accurate. Mr. Castor, is that communication from the whistleblower to the Inspector General to explain prior inconsistent statements reflected anywhere in the 299-page report?
No.
On October 2nd, Chairman Schiff's spokesman, Patrick Bolin, acknowledged publicly that the outlines of the whistleblower's accusations against the president had been disclosed to the House intelligence staff and shared with Chairman Schiff. Mr. Castor, is that disclosure and Mr. Bolin's admission of that disclosure anywhere in this report?
I don't remember seeing it.
It's not. I think all members of Congress should be held accountable during this impeachment process. And to that end, if I have made any false statements about the whistleblower or the Inspector General's testimony today, then I should be held accountable. The way to do that would be to release the Inspector General's testimony, or even just pages 53 to 73. I would add that there's nothing in those pages that would in any way identify or place at risk the whistleblower's identity, nor would it reveal any information that in any way relates to, much less jeopardizes, national security. Look, maybe there's a believable explanation for why the whistleblower made statements that weren't true or accurate about his contact or her contact with Chairman Schiff in writing and then again verbally. Maybe there's a good explanation for why the words Congress or Congressional Committee was confusing or not clear to the whistleblower. Maybe there's a good explanation for why the whistleblower also misled the Inspector General in writing on August 12th by stating, "I reserve the option to exercise my legal right to contact the committees directly," when the whistleblower had in fact already contacted Chairman Schiff's committee 2 weeks before he or she wrote that. Maybe there's a believable reason why Chairman Schiff was not initially truthful about his staff's communications with the whistleblower. Maybe there's a good reason that explains all of these statements in writing and verbally that just weren't true and correct. Maybe there is, but there is no good reason for voting to impeach and remove from office an American president without allowing a single question to be asked of a single witness to get an explanation for why the Inspector General was not told the truth about contacts between the whistleblower and Chairman Schiff. The bottom line is we should all be held accountable, and next November, every member of the House will be asked this question: did you vote to impeach the president without allowing any investigation into why the whistleblower that started it all did so by making statements in writing and verbally under penalty of perjury that were not true? Democrats may not care if that question ever gets answered, but the voters will.
One quick thing before we enter. It does matter when they knew and didn't know, because after they supposedly found out, it does matter because after they two meetings with officials from the United States, it was never talked about and no linkage was made. So it does matter. And the reason it matters is because if there is no understanding that this is being withheld, there is no threat, there is no quid pro quo. And it also goes to the state of mind of Mr. Zelensky, who says, I'm not being pressured, there's nothing here. And again, it goes back to the amazing thought of this majority who keeps calling the Ukrainian leader a liar. It's just amazing that we continue to propagate that myth here tonight. But what did we learn today? Here's some things we did learn today. It's an unprecedented hearing that Mr. Sensenbrenner and others talked about, in which staff basically not members gave testimony and questioned each other and got into very heated debates with each other. This is not what the Judiciary Committee should be doing. It's not the way this should be held. Again, the reason it is, Mr. Goldman handled himself very well, but he's not Adam Schiff. He doesn't wear a member pin. This is ridiculous. We shouldn't be doing this. The Intel Committee also, what we did find out today, took phone records and went on a political endeavor against the ranking member and others, but no one will take responsibility for telling the staff to use Mr. Nunez's numbers or others, or who decided to put the smear job in the report. We'll just assume that's Mr. Schiff, since I do hold the member accountable. You know, also we found out today, which is really interesting, that staff can determine what's relevant or not members of Congress. It's interesting to me that staff told members of Congress that that wasn't relative or that wasn't relevant. Again, it goes back to the problem we don't have members here to actually talk about this. Also, it just is another thing we've learned today, that the chairman continues to just disregard House rules. Just completely, blatantly disregarding House rules on not addressing the minority hearing day. And if I hear basically one more time, I'll address that when we're marking up impeachment articles. What is the use of a minority hearing day if you're going to have evidence about the markup if you get the confirmation at the markup itself? Even your most heated debate on getting rid of this president does not show any way that can be fair. And in the end, both parties are in the minority. If you destroy the institutional integrity, which again, the staff have talked about today, if we destroy the institutional integrity, there's nothing else for us to do. But while we were here, there was something that did happen. And as we were sitting here discussing whether to impeach the president over a call he had with the Ukrainian president and President Zelensky, which took place on how there was a look at how it happened in 2016. Democrats are seeking to impeach the president over that, and we're seeing the problems with the Russia investigation play out again in front of our eyes. The fuss over the Ukraine is the same thing, using the same playbook. A select group of individuals colluding against the President Trump to ensure they get him. And they are blowing through every procedure and principle of fairness and honesty to ensure they get him in time. So what happened today while we were stuck here? The Inspector General report. The review of 4 FISA applications and other aspects of the FBI Crossfire hurricane investigation. Here's some of the top findings. The FBI included inaccurate information in the Carter Page FISA application. The FBI failed to include exculpatory information in the FISA. The FBI did not corroborate a huge amount of the information in the Page FISA. The FBI chose to defensively brief candidate Clinton, not candidate Trump. The FBI failed to disclose Bruce Orr's information that Steele reporting was going directly to the Clinton campaign. An FBI attorney altered another agency's email to mislead about whether Carter Page had actually been a U.S. intelligence source. The bottom line, the report shows the Page FISA should have never been obtained. If you don't have the Page FISA, you don't have a Russia investigation. If you don't have a Russia investigation, you can't knock out the president as a candidate at the time of the 26th election, and you can't hamstring the president's first 2 years with a special counsel investigation. I could go on, but Mr. Durham, who has already weighed in, has the next batch of this, and we will see where it goes. But I do want to take one last thing from our side. because this undoubtedly will be the last hearing because we have no desire to hear anything from our side, minority hearing or otherwise. I want to take the time to thank Mr. Castor and Ms. Callan. They're the top investigators in the Intelligence and Judiciary Committee, and they combined have 15 to 20 years experience in the House conducting investigations to protect American interests and taxpayer dollars. What these public servants don't usually do as a part of their work is field questions from others who come before them, from Democrats, donors, and pundits. Ms. Castor and Ms. Callan usually work for and alongside members of Congress and fellow public servants. I'm sorry today that the majority chose to highlight their investigators and also the ones that have been brought in over these public servants. I'm sorry to choose that this is where we're at, but I would like to thank them for their work today. I'd like to thank them for their work on our behalf, but also I think really for all the ones listening here. If you look around the room, this is what's happening to the American people. By the end of the day, most in the back left, most of the members of the media are begging to go somewhere else because at the end of the day, your case isn't made. And one thing that just keeps amazingly said from Mr. Goldman to the chairman to others, that these facts are undisputed. The very nature of the fact that I say I disagree and you say you don't is a disputed fact. These are disputed facts. It'll be the first impeachment that is partisan on facts that are not agreed to. That is the state in which the judiciary has become. We have become a rubber stamp, just as the chairman predicted almost 20 years ago when we willingly accept from someone else a project or a report that we don't investigate ourselves. And with that, that is the problem we have, and that is the farce called the Judiciary Committee impeachment scam today.